Kevin
Is
Durant.
this?
This
Oh
is Kevin
man,
Durant.
Kevin Wayne didn't
This is
make
Kevin
it.
Durant. He didn't even come close to making it, respectfully. But this is Kevin Durant. Talk to me about your number 8 selection.
I mean, do y'all watch him dribble and shoot? I know, but it like for real, like a 7 foot player throughout his career, you could definitely argue is the best scorer ever. Fluid athlete. Also, one of the things that don't get talked enough about, in my opinion, about KD, like we always bring up how LeBron is this freakish generational athlete, Wilt, Shaq. I think KD's very much way up that list himself. Him being 7 foot tall, that fluid, that coordinated, um, to have that good of body control, that fast, that quick, um, especially in like his OKC days, obviously before the foot injury. Then you go to Golden State, he has the Achilles tear, but even in Golden State, just a freakish athlete. So you're talking about one of the greatest transition scorers ever. Um, can shoot the three, got the midi, can handle the ball. As he progressed in his career, became a better defender, could pass and play make. I do get the fact that he's not able to do the on-ball responsibilities to some of the capacity of the other like great scoring, playmaking wings like MJ, Kobe, Bron, etc. But I still think he just puts the ball in the basket at a high enough clip and with such efficiency that can somewhat make up for that lack of the passing playmaking part. And then again, as people don't realize, to me, people think he started playing defense in Golden State. I think he was really good towards the end of OKC defensively as well. So I just think he's one of the greatest all around basketball players we've seen.
Yeah, I had KD at 9. I think 9. Let me check.
That's
I
what
had
you
KD at
said.
9. Yeah, I had KD at 9. I echo a lot of Real Talk sentiments. I think I wouldn't make the argument he's the greatest scorer ever. I think one person comfortably holds that crown. But I would make the argument he's the most versatile scorer ever. I would like just the amount
Mhm.
of ways you can deploy it. And if you value that, which you do, I understand making the case. But at some point, Michael Jordan kind of different. So I'm gonna leave that one alone. But just
I
in
mean,
terms of what he can do,
one of the
and I think okay. I think just in terms of what he can do, and I think we as a basketball community have gone so I don't want to call it fake woke, but people have just decided that scoring just isn't that important. And I don't like it. I don't like the idea that the best offensive player is just the best combination of scoring and playmaking. I don't subscribe to that notion. I don't think, oh well, KD's a great scorer, Luka's a great scorer, but Luka's a better playmaker. Luka's better on offense. I'm just using Luka as an example. But I don't like that. I feel like there's more nuance to it. I do think the amount of ways you can deploy Kevin Durant is important to this conversation. I do think the fact that Kevin Durant is one of low-end estimate, the 10 best shooters ever, goes into this equation. I do think the fact that Kevin Durant, to Real Talk's point, is one of the greatest athletes we've ever seen at that size, that transition weapon he was, goes into that equation. I do think the fact that Kevin Durant, especially before the Achilles, had one of the best handles for a guy his size we've ever seen. Probably the best, if I'm being honest. Like, this was someone who you could genuinely give the ball to and could create offense one-on-one out of pick and roll and could do it efficiently. And then as he's aged, he's become a better playmaker. He's become a better passer. He's not going to be someone who's going to dice up defenses with manipulation and all of that stuff. But with the attention he draws, he can make adequate reads that still lead to advantages being created. And then when you're that good off the ball, I think all of that does start to add up to being one of the best offensive players you've ever seen. And we're at the point where the longevity is stacking up. And that's why I'm really high on Kevin Durant. I do think, for example, my number 10, I think did peak higher than Kevin Durant. But when I start looking at just this as a cumulative value of someone's career, we're looking at Kevin Durant, who's been a top 5 player, in my opinion, since his 3rd year in the league, and was still a top 5 player in the NBA in like 2023. Like, that's how good I think he has been for so long. And I'm not giving him bonus points for this. He's had 2 career-altering injuries, and he's come back and still looked amazing. This is someone who is going to retire undoubtedly with a top 5 points total in NBA history. I think he catches MJ this year. This is someone who's top 5 all time in points per game amongst like legitimately qualified players, not Joel Embiid and those types of guys. This is someone who is top 5 all time in points per game in the finals. This is someone who's top 5 all time in points per game in the playoffs. Everywhere you go, Kevin Durant produces elite level offense, elite level scoring, and he's done it for a really long time. And that was just enough for me to get him onto my top 10 and get him at number 9. The reason I couldn't get him higher is he wasn't either the level of offensive engine some of my other guys were, or he wasn't the same level of two-way force that some of my other guys were. He didn't strike that balance to where I could put him in the tier 1 offensive player or the tier 1 two-way player. So he just fell below, but I do have him at my number 9. John D, what about you with Kevin Durant?
I think you hit a lot of it. I mean, we're looking at almost 20 years of Kevin Durant being in the NBA, and he's been a top 5 to 10 scorer throughout majority of them. So the ability to be one of the best players in the league, the ability to have some of your athleticism as far as handle and first step be taken away and still be impactful as an off-ball scorer and mid-range shooter is what makes him extremely valuable to me. The efficiency, the ability to play in transition, the ability to thrive in multiple different roles, whether that was in OKC, in Golden State, in Phoenix, in Brooklyn. 2021, I think he was great. I think he had an argument for the best player in the world in 2021. In 2019, I think he had an argument as well, especially, I don't know if that was 21 or 22, where it was no Kyrie, no Harden or Ben Simmons, and it was just him. And he was playing really well. And then in 2014, when Russ was out, he was like the majority ball handler, and that Thunder team was still really good. So I think Kevin Durant has the case. I mean, the longevity is there, the impact is there, the scoring numbers are there. You said it earlier, he's about to pass Michael Jordan on the scoring list. With all of that, I had to put him in here.
Welcome to the show, Lo. You haven't missed much. We're doing the guys who didn't quite make the cut. So what you've missed is Scottie Pippen with 1 point. Yes,
Ox.
Shout out to Ox. You missed 1 Scottie Pippen vote. Okay. You missed 1 Kevin Garnett vote, courtesy of Pirate, and you missed 1 Jerry West vote, courtesy of Real Talk. That's what you missed. And we're now on to Kevin Durant, who came 13th with 9 total points. The top row up here all had him on the list. Yourself and Carson did not. I'm gonna go to Carson first. What led you to not having KD on the list? What were the drawbacks? All of that good stuff.
I think you basically touched on it at the end of your spiel, Mars. And by the way, I consider myself to be really high on KD. I consider myself a real KD defender. So I'm surprised to see that actually out of 5 guys here, I'm one of the only 2 who didn't have him in the top 10. But it does come down to, like, if I am comparing him peak to peak against, say, a Magic or a Steph, right? These guys who I do consider tier 1 offensive engines of all time. Magic, greatest playmaker ever, was basically an automatic number 1 offense, arguably elevated his teammates more than anybody else in terms of direct on-ball creation. And then Steph just changes the geometry of a defense like nobody else I've ever seen. They're on a different level from KD as offensive engines. And then there are the bigs who are like truly transformative defensive players and really good offensive players. And I just prefer either of those slightly. That being said, I think the argument for KD at this point, well, first of all, the peak is extremely high, but it's the longevity, man. I mean, one of my favorite stats, LeBron has 20 seasons scoring 25 plus points per game, which is just like unfathomable. Nobody else in NBA history has more than 12, except KD has 16. So, like, in terms of just that scoring longevity year after year, the gap between LeBron and KD is the same as the gap between KD and the field. He's got top 5 longevity in the history of the sport, and that does matter. But like I said earlier, I do lean on the side of peak. I see the case for KD absolutely as one of the greatest plug-and-play superstars ever with just his insane offensive versatility. I do think he's the second best scorer ever and the most versatile. And I think you see that with his ability to change situations, endure injuries, right? Post-Jones fracture, he goes to Golden State. And 2014 KD is a downhill monster, getting to the line 10 times a game, right? Just athletically on top of his all-time skill, an absolute freak. Then he gets to the Warriors. He doesn't quite have that same pop, but now he's one of the greatest off-ball scorers we've ever seen, one of the greatest shooters we've ever seen, insane efficiency, and he's reaching like near all defense level, maybe all defense level. Then he tears his Achilles, comes to Brooklyn, can still shoot 55% from mid-range, 40% from 3, and reaches his peak as a pick-and-roll playmaker. Like, the guy's an absolute basketball legend. I think he does make a legitimate top 10 case. There's just other guys who I slightly prefer.
Kevin Durant shot 59% from mid-range in 2023.
Stupid, man.
That's crazy.
But
That's the
hey,
equivalent of a 40% 3-point shooter, pretty much.
Yeah.
But Lo, you didn't have Kevin Durant. What led you? Did you consider him? What led you to favoring other guys? All of that stuff.
Yeah, if anybody's in my top 20, KD's not too far removed from like top 10 status. So it's not as if like it's too crazy. I think Carson kind of hit it on the nose with some of the things, but I do think like as time progresses, people tend to understate how good he was at his peak, because at his peak, he was actually like really, 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 really good. Some of the longevity for me becomes a little spotty, because even with some of the years in Brooklyn where he looks amazing, it's just not enough games for me to like kind of count that towards like high impactful seasons. So that's kind of iffy. And then also like the early stages of his career, I think people kind of understate how much of a like flaws his offensive game had. But I think like from like 2016 to around to 2019 and maybe a year or two in Brooklyn, offensively, like it's really hard to like match what KD's doing amongst any player all time. But for me, some of those longevity years, it doesn't like correlate as enough, but it's close though. It's really, really close.
I think that's a good point to bring up. Just that like pre 2014, he was not the playmaker that he became. And obviously he's still not an upper echelon playmaker, but he became a legitimately good playmaker and has been since. But before that, he really was more limited there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my biggest issue with him. Just looking at like some of those playoff runs, 2011, 2012. I think you started to see the development in 2013 out of necessity because Russ goes down and KD kind of gets thrust into that point forward role. And now there were some tough moments, tough series against Memphis where he is turning the ball over. But I think that was the start of the development of that responsibility. And I think he's grown because of it. But I do definitely agree that although he was a top 5 player those years, the flaws were there that could be exploited and could lead to why you might not be able to win with that type of player leading your charge. Real talk.
Here we go.
no, I do find it interesting that it's like, okay, so let's say 20 was the year they went to the finals, 2012?
2012.
Right, against Miami. I think we would all agree that he was a flawed playmaker and passer then,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Okay. I think for me personally, the fact that he was still hands down the best scorer in the league, I just think that can ease away some of the value to me that he's bleeding as a passer playmaker. I do understand that like people put a lot of value on that, especially for people that are going to have the ball a lot, such as Kevin Durant and Russ did on those OKC teams. But I don't know. I think it gets overstated. Like, oh, he's not the greatest scorer, and it's like, no, he's not. But he's the best scorer in the league, kind of hands down. I do think at a certain point that does kind of usurp the value he's bleeding as a passer player.
The only pushback I will give there is that I think that at that time we may not have been familiar with how bad he was as a potential passer playmaker because he had both Russ and Harden on his roster. Because obviously, you know, I guess from one example to another extreme one, once Harden left and then Russ, you could like very clearly see, especially in certain playoff series. But I mean, the standard is pretty high for like top 10 to be also fair. But
yeah.
You know.
That's what I think a lot of it comes down to. I mean, we're just nitpicking because we have to nitpick all of these guys. We're talking about the absolute best of the best. And that's where I do think, like, even when we are talking about KD improved as a playmaker, like, he's never going to reach the level of offensive impact of a Steph Curry. And like, we see that where in the years they play together, when I think KD wasn't quite what he was in 2014, but was still really damn close. 2017 to 2019 KD, ridiculous. But it's like when Steph plays without him, they go 27-4. When he plays without Steph, they're 23-17. If you do look at like the impact metrics on off, his differential isn't stacking up against some of the other all-time greats of this era. And I think he offset some of that with just like, again, being so versatile, being so malleable in terms of the number of guys you can play him alongside, and he thrives. But there are dudes who are just better at purely elevating an offense than KD, in my opinion. 2014 KD, absolute monster. But once he did lose that little bit of athleticism, it's incredible how great he remained. But I do think that took him down a little bit as like an offensive engine.
I don't like the stat that gets used with the without KD Curry and them were 20, and because I've heard that often, but to me, that team was already put together around Steph Curry. To me, it makes sense that they're better with Steph. They have the camaraderie. They've been together for years. You have players like Draymond Green who definitely fit a Steph Curry better than a Kevin Durant and how he wants to play when the others off the court. Like that, to me, that's not a point to they're better with Steph. In my opinion, I think the
I think
team
it
was already
matters.
built for Steph Curry.
I just think it's easier to build an offense around Steph Curry. You can say the last handful of years they've built the offense around Steph and they've put a bunch of bad offensive players around them, and he still like single-handedly saves that. It's just crazy when you have a guy who can shoot from 30 feet from the basket with 40 to 45% three-point efficiency on ball and off ball. Like, he just totally changes the dynamics of offense for everybody. Like, I know it's a cliche, but the gravity actually is so insane and how it elevates everybody. And I think that that's where you see that difference. They made the finals in 2019 without KD, with a roster that really wasn't very good. Obviously, he still had Clay and Dre, but the depth was so lacking, and Steph was just that monumentally great offensively. So that's where I do see a gap, having watched every game of those teams as a Warriors fan.
They beat Portland, but
they destroyed Portland.
And they were like
I saw
losing
Clay and
during those
Draymond a few
games.
years before them
in 2016. Draymond was great in that 2019 series too. He got like a triple-double in like 20 minutes in one of those games, I remember. We will move off KD after this. My, I guess, counter to like the Warriors without KD but with Steph, and then the Warriors with KD without Steph, is like, if you look at it like the on-off stuff, when Kevin Durant was on the floor without Draymond, Clay, and Steph, and then when Steph was on the floor without Draymond, KD, and Clay, the Warriors offense had a higher offensive rating with just Kevin Durant than the inverse. And it never gets brought up. And I think part of that is because they just put more defensively slanted lineups around Steph. But that also goes down to roster construction. If you have to put defensively slanted rosters around Steph to hide him, that goes to Kevin Durant's offensive value, because you can put him out there with better offensive pieces who might have defensive shortcomings because he can also cover for them. So when Kevin Durant has a 117 offensive rating in the minutes without Clay, Draymond, and Steph, and Steph has a, let me find it, Steph has a 114, I think that does go to show that Kevin Durant can floor raise an offense. Kevin Durant was very impactful in Golden State. Now, there are obviously nuances.
There's no question about that. The question
was really good.
Is he as impactful as Steph? Is he as great a floor or ceiling raiser?
I would say no, personally. Yeah, I would say no.
And I would agree. And overall, like, if you just look at the offensive on-off from these years they played together, KD without Steph, 112 offensive rating. Steph without KD, 117 offensive rating, which is insane. And then I think where they get props is like when you put both them on the floor, they're both among the most like scalable ceiling raising offensive players ever. They have a 123 offensive rating together. So I think they both deserve props for that, but I do think Steph is still more transformative.
Before we move on to number 12, we have got a couple super chats. Shout out to everyone who sends super chats. We appreciate it. Said, the surface level perspective persists. A 7-footer isn't a heliocentric guard level passer playmaker, so he's not a tier 1 offensive engine. Shocker. Yeah, I just like, what happened to the good old days where a 7-footer is meant to have a guard next to them, and that's not a bad thing.
But you're a perimeter player, so it's a different archetype. We're not talking about a big who needs a great pick and roll playmaker.
Yeah, but like if someone was like, Dirk needs someone to get him the ball. It's like,
we're not talking about Dirk as a top 10 player of all time. If
he's one of the best offensive players of all time.
Absolutely. And so is KD. But we're not talking about Dirk today. This is what I'm saying. We're nitpicking all of these dudes. And like tier 1 offensive player ever, for me, that's, I believe, 5 guys. So it's not a knock to say you're not a tier 1 offensive player ever, but the team results, and I would argue like just the skill set analysis, don't have KD as a tier 1 offensive player ever. He wasn't just single-handedly engineering elite offenses like even a Steve Nash was, like even an Oscar Robertson was. And they're different kinds of players, right? Those guys are inherently just more ball dominant. Maybe they can elevate inferior supporting cast, whereas KD is more of a ceiling raiser. But yeah, I don't think it's disrespectful to say KD isn't one of the 5 greatest offensive players ever.
I don't think that's disrespectful, but I think when it comes to leading the great offenses, I think there is like a very common theme of having like this singular engine, which Kevin Durant isn't. I think we all agree on that.
Mhm.
But there is something to be said about the portability, the versatility,
Of
and maybe
course.
that doesn't get him into tier 1. I don't have him in tier 1, but that does hold more value beyond just pure scoring plus playmaking equals offense. Like
I totally
that
agree.
has to be a function in the equation. That's all I'm kind of pushing back on that. I feel like it gets way too simplistic when evaluating offense.
I'm 27 a night on great efficiency on all 30 teams in the league. I could go to any team in the association, and I'm going to do what you expect Kevin Durant to do. I do think that's,
And you don't have to alter
And that's
the
why
roster for that.
and that's why he's a top 10 offensive player ever, just not a top 5 offensive player ever.
And that's why he's the 13th greatest player of all time, according to the Hoop Talk podcast.